Print servers in federal environments create risk and unnecessary complexity. Every new printer, location, or policy adds strain to infrastructure that was never built for today's demands. FedRAMP High Authorized Printer Logic eliminates print servers with a secure cloud-native, zero-trust solution designed for federal IT. With advanced security, centralized control, and simplified management, agencies can modernize print without added burden. See what secure serverless printing looks like. Visit Vasion.com to learn more.
Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
The Air Force is requesting what's likely a record $10 billion facility construction budget for fiscal 2027, up from $3.9 billion in 2026. And when you add other construction projects like military family housing and facility sustainment and restoration, the budget request skyrockets to almost $27 billion. All in all, federal agencies are planning to spend more money than ever on construction and maintenance projects in the coming years. Brigadier General Patrick Miller is the commander of the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. He talked about the facility investment plan with Federal News Network's Jason Miller.
As you alluded to, potential for a really big program in FY27, and we're leaning all into that through technology, through new authorities that were authorized in FY26 NDAA. Specifically, the push to use other transactional authorities in the construction realm. Typically, you see that in other arenas, but we now have the ability to use that in the construction area, which means we've got a lot more work ahead of us, and the workforce is the same. And so we need to figure out how do we get the best utilization out of our workforce to allow them to do the things that only they can do, while capitalizing on technologies such as artificial intelligence to be able to take away some of those routine tasks and even, quite frankly, help us think through problem sets a little bit faster. Earlier this year, in April, the Air Force established and published their Department of Air Force data strategy as well as their artificial intelligence strategy. That set the foundation, recognizing officially that data is a weapon system in and of itself. And the quicker we can access that data through the cloud, the more informed we're going to be across the board. A great example of where we did that recently is down at Tyndall Air Force Base. If folks recall, back in 2018, Tyndall was struck with a Category 5 Hurricane Michael. And we had the opportunity to essentially start from a clean slate, something we haven't done in a while, to build what we termed then the installation of the future. And we used the Internet of Things. We started to pull in the different aspects of data, whether it's coming from utilities or installing the right monitors in new facilities, to be able to capture as much information as we can and then use that to get more predictive in our decisions. And so being able to aggregate all of that data into a central location, into a central repository, access that from different nodes so that our security forces, the defenders, the police department of the installation can respond real world to incidents, as well as our civil engineers that are maintaining that installation. And so as we jump all into artificial intelligence and go from beyond where we are today to generative AI to agentic AI, we've got a lot of great opportunities ahead of us, and we're looking forward to capitalizing on those.
Artificial intelligence, AI, everyone loves talking about it these days. In the construction world, I'm really interested to understand a little more about how and where that's going to be applied, how it's being used today, some of the future. So, General Miller, I'll start with you. What's this Air Force starting to apply AI? Where are some of the opportunities today? Where do you see it going in the future?
Thanks for that. Yeah, I will tell you, we're excited about where we're going with AI. Right now, we're exploring generative AI to help advance designs faster. You heard a little bit earlier about how long it takes for construction to happen across the Department of War. Specifically, it could take anywhere from 7 to 10 years from requirement generation, if it's a military construction project, through design, execution, appropriation, and execution. So that's a long time. And so anything we can do to shrink that kill chain of construction puts our warfighters in a better position. Specifically for the Air Force, our installations are the power projection platform for aerospace and cyberspace. That's where we do our fly, fix, fight from. And so being able to advance construction speed and decrease cost through acquisition reform and construction reform allows us to arm our warfighters earlier to be prepared for the next fight. And so what we're looking at doing right now, as I'd mentioned, generative AI in designs, especially where we have standardized construction. Think dormitories, child development centers, fitness centers, hangars, things that are common across those power projection platforms. Can we come up with a design that is that standardized design and just needs to be site adapt based off of that location? And then you can bring in agentic AI and say, okay, site adapt for Alaska, site adapt for Florida. And it goes out and scrubs unified facilities criteria, international building code, local code, makes those adaptions. We can feed in new testing, whether it's on the environmental front or geotechnical front, to be able to accelerate that design. I had mentioned earlier about using other transactional authorities. That also includes doing things like progressive design build or accelerated design build. The traditional construction model for the department has been design bid build or design build. While changing it to progressive design build gets earlier stakeholder involvement, which means we're not going through that initial design phase that we would originally do. So getting that design through generative AI is going to be important. And then as we start to look at in construction, one of the things that lengthens the process and increase cost and schedule is whenever we hit a modification, a change order, a request for proposal, or even a requirement owner changes a requirement. By bringing AI into that to help us capture that requirement, develop the right request for proposal, evaluate that proposal whenever it comes in to make sure it meets the right criteria, will increase that decision space, decrease the amount of time that we're lagging for that decision, hopefully help us identify the right supply chain to be able to get that, especially if we start to see a limitation in a certain component, propose some alternatives. So there's some great opportunities for AI to be able to accelerate construction from the very beginning and design all the way through actual execution to delivering something to the warfighter.
General Miller, I'm interested to maybe dig deeper into some of the use cases. Do you have some specific use cases today where you're starting to apply these technologies? And it can be kind of initial AI, to Andrew's point, how you define it, it's how you define it. But like, you're starting to see some changes where we're seeing by applying this type of technology, we've already cut time or cost or schedule, or what improvements are you already starting to see?
Yeah, as indicated, we are currently running a test case where we are designing a dormitory at one of our installations using generative AI. And so we're going to see how that plays out, compare it against the original construction or original designs that we have at other installations. Where I think we're going to start to see some benefit and some of the doors are going to open is typically in the Department of War, we use something called the Unified Facilities Criteria as an additive, and it can sometimes be more restrictive if you assess some of the cost increases that happen inside a fence line of an installation versus outside the fence line of an installation. Some of it is attributed to Unified Facilities Criteria, all developed for good reasons at the time. But we also have something called the International Building Code, and using AI to compare and then also scrub the supply chain to say, where does this make sense? Does it make more sense to use the International Building Code and seek a waiver to the Unified Facilities Criteria, or is the Unified Facilities Criteria the right thing? And depending on what's going on, maybe it offers an alternative part or piece for construction. And so those are the types of things that we are testing right now with the dormitory project. We are also looking at trying to refine cost estimates. Cost estimates were mentioned earlier. We typically use a lot of industry models, think RS means, or sometimes a proprietary model developed by one of our contractors that is doing recurring work in an installation on an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity type contract. But where we typically hit bumps in the road is on the cost side. Sometimes costs will exceed an approval threshold, and then all of a sudden we're going to have to seek a higher level of approval. Maybe that's in different levels inside the Pentagon. But by using AI, we're trying to get a better understanding of local supplies, cost indices, real-time cost data. Say something happens in the steel market or the cement market, and that's going to fluctuate the cost, or in the long time that it takes for a project to get through the system, costs have changed due to inflation. And so we're attacking AI to be able to help us get better at cost estimating because that has tended to be a challenge and also an item of interest from Congress, especially on those military construction projects that are in the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. And we've got some significant weapon systems that we're pursuing between Sentinel and the F-47 and B-21. Lots of construction coming up, and cost is typically at the center of the conversation for all of them.
That's Brigadier General Patrick Miller, the commander of the Air Force Civil Engineer Center. To watch his full conversation with Jason Miller, go to federalnewsnetwork.com.
What does it take to drive transformational change in large, mission-driven organizations? In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, former Treasury Fiscal Assistant Secretary David Brig sits down with WEPA CEO Shane Canfield to explore the answer to that question. Drawing on nearly 4 decades of public service, Brig shares insights on how to maintain employee trust and accountability while striving for strategic leadership and operational excellence. He discusses his biggest lessons learned from modernizing major government systems and how he worked to break down silos and build high-performing teams, all while staying rooted in character and integrity.
Hello and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WEPA. Today I'm joined by David Brig, former Fiscal Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, the department's most senior career position, where he spent nearly 4 decades helping oversee and modernize the federal government's financial infrastructure, including payments, collecting, debt financing, and cash management. David, welcome and thank you for being here.
It's a real pleasure to be here.
So let's jump right in. What does it actually take to drive transformational change inside the federal government? And related, Treasury is obviously a huge organization. What did that teach you about leadership as you drove these changes?
Sure. I think one of the things that you realize as time is that change and transformational change is very difficult, but it is doable. And I think sometimes we don't think that we can do big things in government, and yet we can. I think over the course of my career, I was enormously fortunate to work with some of the really, really wonderful people, some of the most preeminent people in government over the course of the last 35 years. And from them, you learn a lot of really important lessons about leadership. I think early in my career, what I would tell you is that I was very much new when I interacted with political appointees as a civil servant, that you're really an advisor. And I've had some really wonderful experiences advising some of really great people. My second job at Treasury, for example, was as a special assistant to Jay Powell. I knew I was not going to be the smartest person in the room or the expert on many things that were going on. But what I did know is that I had a very good understanding about what it meant to navigate in government. Also what it meant to advise and provide options and analysis to decision makers. As you move up in your career and you actually take on more operational responsibility, you find out that you are a decision maker. And when you are a decision maker, I had a very good framework that I used throughout my career, which is you as a well-led organization, the leadership had to think about 3 very distinct things. One was thinking strategically about where the organization was going, not just about where it was going tomorrow and the next day, but actually into the future. The second area was that you really had to be able to deliver on the operational excellence. So if you're responsible for providing a service or a product, you need to do that well, and you need to think very purposefully about that. And the third area is really about people and about how you attract good people, how you retain good people, how you incent good people, and how you really treat people. And so throughout my career, I had an opportunity to see people be very effective in all 3 of those areas. So when it came time to do transformational change, that model worked very well. I would also say that what you learn very early on is that regardless is that you as an individual, it takes the ability to work collectively and collaboratively with a lot of people. And so some of the things that I did, for example, which were cross-government, you realize that you really didn't have authority over many of the people that you were asking to do something different. But if you had character and competence, you could actually have trust. And so I think when people looked and said, this is someone who has capability and they have character, they will actually go and reduce the friction and actually making change. And so those collaborative relationships, that ability to sort of lead with purpose, I think was very important with respect to really driving transformational change.
Yeah, that's an amazing perspective. I just had a chance to listen in a small room to the CEO and the chairman of the board for Marriott Corporation, and they're celebrating their 100th birthday next year. Most U.S. companies don't make it to 100, and so it was fascinating. Both of them were asked, to what do you attribute this? And they said, both of them, with energy, it was about their people. They focused on their people, and everything came back to the employees, the people that work there, the people that they have to motivate. Do you find something similar in government?
I do. I actually take oftentimes you'll hear people say people are the most important asset in an organization, and there's an element of truth to that, but I also think that leadership is probably the most important attribute in an organization, because if you have the right leaders and you're using a framework like I mentioned, you're going to be really focused on getting good people in the organization, and those people will thrive. I think the thing that you find, certainly in government, is that federal employees are very mission-driven.
Yeah.
And they are committed, and there's a lot of discussion about, what really motivates people, intrinsic versus extrinsic, motivators. And I really do believe that, when you really get a high-performing organization, regardless of whether it's private sector or public sector, it's going to be those intrinsic things which are going to actually drive employees to do great things. And so setting up those right working conditions to remind people how important they are, to actually invest in their development, to actually give them good feedback. One of the things that is really important in an organization is if you really care about an employee and you really want to see them develop, you have to tell them not only good things, you have to tell them things they have to work on. And I think you need to set up an environment, and we had a saying, which is feedback is a gift, and assume noble intent, so that when someone gives you feedback, your first reaction shouldn't be defensive. It should be, let me make sure I can really understand why I'm getting feedback and what I can do about that. I think of a story from a book called Radical Candor, in which the author had gone out and spent a lot of time recruiting a new executive in the organization and thought they had a perfect match. They got to 6 months and the executive was struggling, and they ultimately fired the executive. And at the exit interview, she had turned to the executive and he said, well, I really wish someone would have told me earlier on what I wasn't doing well. And I tell that story because I think it sort of says that if you're not giving good feedback to people, you've spent all this money on recruiting someone, all this time, and we know it takes a lot of time to bring people on board. And if you're not giving them the benefit of doubt, you're not giving regular feedback to someone about what they can do better, then you potentially have a failure. And now you have another vacancy that you have to fill, which is very costly and expensive. So I think you need to have, and I think there's another element of that, which is in a high-performing organization, if people are comfortable raising their hand when something's not going right. And in my world, large-scale operations and what we did, every day something doesn't go right. It's just inevitable. And the issue within a well-performing, a high-performing organization is that people will raise their hand and say, we have a problem and we need to fix it. And the leadership is receptive to that and says, okay, what do we need to do? And then after the problem is solved, you have an obligation to go back and do lessons learned, do action learning to see, hey, what could we have done differently? How could we have avoided that problem? So that you have a learning organization. It's not just that you're comfortable communicating and have trust in the organization that you can communicate openly, but also that you're learning as you go along every day to improve your operations.
The very first podcast guest we had was Cutler Dawson, who was an admiral in the Navy, in charge of the Enterprise carrier and the fleet in the beginning of Desert Storm. And then he went on to run Navy Federal, the world's largest credit union. And it was fascinating to hear you because he used an example of a problem they had on deck on the with airplanes on the carrier. And it was a pretty serious accident that happened. His culture was exactly what you said. You've got to talk. Whether you're at fault or not, whether you're partly at fault, it doesn't matter. We have to have an honest conversation about this. And that doesn't mean there weren't consequences, but at the same time, that honesty has to be front and center.
It really is true, and I think I think that you raise an interesting point, which I think sometimes the word accountability has a negative connotation. You're going to be held accountable, but I would have it in a different way, which is we're accountable for high performance, and we're accountable to each other to make sure that we can deliver on our mission, and that's a positive attribute along the way. And I think when organizations take that seriously, the collaboration, the teamwork, the openness, the feedback, but they also have a culture of accountability. That says we do things well. We're going to actually be successful at what we do, and we all have a commitment to doing that. I think you get really a high-performing organization.
You've been listening to a preview edition of Lessons in Leadership. To hear the rest of this conversation and all past episodes, subscribe to Lessons in Leadership wherever you get your podcasts.